I'm sure you heard the news. The United States are fighting another war in the Middle East for Israel. After Syria, Libya and Iraq, the US and Israel attacked last Friday Israel's last big threat for their hegemony in the Middle East, which is Iran. To many of you, it may seem that this conflict has been going on since last year, when Israel and the US bombed Iran's nuclear facility at Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan. But this conflict was actually decades in the making, and it is one of the last steps for Israel to become a regional power. When we talk about Israel and Zionism, we assume that the Zionists only fight for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This is supposed to be their promised land, right? Well, let's look at the actual promised land in Genesis chapter 15 verse 18. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile, to the great river of the Euphrates." Now this is actually what the Zionists mean when they talk about their promised land. It includes eastern Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, southern Syria, western Iraq and northern Saudi Arabia. This is Greater Israel. When we talk about Israeli wars, you must realize that this is their objective. It is not just Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Gaza, it is practically the entire Middle East. But you can't just take this land as various countries already claim it, and some of these countries and their allies are quite powerful, like Egypt, Syria, Libya, Iraq and Iran. So how do you become a regional power if everyone is against you and is stronger than you? Step 1. Get powerful allies. After the devastation of World War II, the Jewish people gained a lot of sympathy from the Western powers like the United States, Great Britain and France. Anyone that was against the Jews was called a Nazi and ostracized from society. Step 2. Get nuclear weapons. The Cold War was the time of several countries building up their nuclear arsenal. Israel also wanted to be a part of this for their intentions. But their biggest ally, the United States, refused to permit them to acquire these nuclear weapons. So they killed a president which forbade them these nuclear weapons, and after all, they got their nuclear weapons. Step 3. Nuclear blackmail. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone was on edge about a nuclear war that would devastate the whole world. So Israel decided to use this fear to their advantage. During the Six-Day War in 1967 and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Israel threatened to use their nuclear bombs against Egypt and Syria if the US didn't come to their help. Now, you can't do nuclear blackmail forever, so that's why you need to convince your allies to go to war for you. And that is step 4, getting your allies to fight your enemies. The country that benefited the most from 9/11 was Israel, because after that the US invaded one of the greatest threats, Iraq. As part of the war on terror which resulted from 9/11, they also toppled the regimes of Syria and Libya. And this is where we are now. One of Israel's last major enemies in the region is the Iranian regime, as they support militias like Hezbollah and Hamas that actively fight against Israel. Now that we know Israel's goal for the war, which is destroying their enemy Iran through a regime change war to help them gain their territories they want, let's look into their strategy. It will be similar to what they used for Syria. Anti-Israel regime out and a pro-Israel regime in. But how are the United States of America and more importantly President Trump crucial for this war? And for this I'll let the expert on US politics explain.
Copy, over. Warpig 3-1, Hitman 2 actual. Alter your approach and be All Stalker 3 Victor, this is Stalker actual. Radio check, over. All Stalker 3 Victor, this is Stalker.
How did we get here? This is not a timeline going back to 1948. What had just happened before the 2016 election? Barack Obama created the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, or the Iranian nuclear deal. And Barack Obama brought together China, Russia, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States and the European Union to enforce a nuclear deal that restricts Iran's enrichment of uranium. The early talks were conducted in secret, and the Israelis were furious about this. They hated Obama. Netanyahu went to a joint session of Congress and gave a speech in defiance of the American president and its nuclear deal, and Congress gave 37 standing ovations. This is the background of Trump's first election. 2016 election happens. Trump gets elected with the help of the Israelis. You don't believe me? There's a whole article about it. It's an excerpt from James Bamford's book, Spy Fail. It goes into great detail about the hidden collusion in the 2016 election, it wasn't Trump and Russia, it was Trump and Israel. And why was Israel so hell-bent on getting a Republican elected in 16? To scuttle the Iranian nuclear deal. And that's exactly what happened. That was the ask.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
In 2018, Donald Trump declares the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, which is the military of the regime, a terrorist group. Green lights that group for sanctions, for attacks. Now the United States is in a shadow war with Iran. It culminates by January 2020 in the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was the architect of the axis of resistance. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Soleimani built all of it. Are you starting to see? Obama had this solved. He made the deal. The Israelis hated him for it. They colluded with Trump to get him elected so that Trump would do maximum pressure and create a ladder of escalation, pulling us out of the deal, declaring the IRGC terrorists, then killing its leader, putting sanctions on the regime. This is a war that started a long time ago that Trump made hot in 2018 and has been going on for 7 years. That's the nature of forever wars. Just like in Iraq, which went from 1990 until today. Just like Libya, which went from 2011 to today. Syria, which went from 2011 to today. And Iran, which went from 2018 until today. That's the nature of forever wars. And if you're not paying attention to those underlying forces, you're going to fall for it again and again. You're going to be surprised and confused and coping over and over. And people are just tripping over themselves to do it again.
Now that we know the recent history behind this war, let's focus on last year and this year. Last year, the official narrative was that Iran was just weeks away from acquiring a nuclear bomb. So Israel and the United States started Operation Midnight Hammer on June 13th, in which Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan were destroyed, thus setting Iran's nuclear bomb progress, if they were even building one, back by several years and weakening them overall. Now the claim is resurfacing again that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. But how could they when all of their facilities were destroyed? Clearly there must be another reason. Now, there have been peace talks in January and February of this year between the US and Iran, and it included that Iran wanted to keep enriching uranium, but the US, in the interest of their greatest ally, refused them to enrich at all. So the deal failed, and Israel dragged the US into a war with Iran on Friday night. It was supposed to be a 4-day operation, with the primary objective of destroying Iran's ballistic missiles to weaken them even more. Now, do you know what Jewish holiday took place just 4 days after the war started? Purim, which celebrates the defeat of Persia against the Jews in the Old Testament. Now, I don't believe that there is 100% a connection, but these coincidences are worth mentioning. Now back to the war. The first few days looked quite good from the perspective of the US and Israel. Reports suggested that Iran used up almost half of its ballistic missiles and that the Ayatollah was dead. But as the war goes on, it is evident that it will go on for months. The US Central Command is already preparing for a war that will last until September. Now, there is a reason why the tide changed so quickly, and the main reason is Iran's ballistic missiles. They are cheap, and Iran has several hidden factories producing them. Now, Israel and the US military bases obviously don't want to get hit by these missiles, since Israel is very small and a few ballistic missiles could already cause big casualties. So they need interceptors. And these interceptors are very expensive. Plus, you need more than one interceptor to intercept just one ballistic missile. But Iran does have one crucial weakness that the US and Israel will probably exploit in the near future. And that is Iran's diversity. Only around 50 million of the 90 million people in Iran are actually Persian. The rest are primarily Azeris, which are the people of Azerbaijan, and Kurds in the western regions. If you have been paying attention to the news in the last months, then you know that there have been protests in western Iran against the regime. Now, who was protesting? Mainly Kurds. And why? Because they are a people without their own country, which is why they are opposing Iran and supporting Israel. So, the next step in the war will either be boots on the ground by the US Army itself, or the US and Israel will arm the Kurds and other ethnic groups opposing the regime to fight Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. I will now move on into how this war affects us, but if you are interested in a detailed breakdown and history of the conflict, then I can only recommend the show America First on Rumble. And I can tell you this has been really helpful, it is really informative, and it was one of my main sources for this video. But how does this war affect us in Europe? Since the Russo-Ukrainian war, we have been dependent on oil and natural gas from the Middle East. And unfortunately, the vast majority of Middle Eastern oil and natural gas has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And due to the war, no ships will pass through since it is too risky. So not only do we not have energy because of sanctions on Russia, but also because of the war in Iran. The results of this are catastrophical. Oil prices will skyrocket and so will inflation. That is if the war goes on for longer. And the EU has no one to blame but itself, since it wasn't forced to completely sanction Russia. Now, I'm not pro-Russian and I don't like Fico and Orban, but I agree with them on this issue that we need Russian oil and gas to prevent inflation and to protect European citizens. If this war goes on for longer and the left refuses to import Russian gas, then they are out for trouble, because the people will vote far-right parties, which will import Russian gas to lower the cost of living. Because most people tend to vote based on the short-term economy. That's why you see Trump not doing mass deportations, because it would be bad for the short-term economy and the Republican Party would brutally lose the midterms and the 2028 election. The only thing that we can hope for is that one of these two wars end quickly and then our prices and everything else will stabilize. Now, you must realize how serious this war is. And this is not only regarding our economy. Iran borders a NATO country, which is Turkey. And Turkey also has a large Kurdish minority in the east. Now, what happens if the Kurds fight Iran and Iran strikes Turkey? Or let's look at it from a different perspective. Israel is already antagonizing Turkey as the next Iran due to an unfriendly regime and also due to tensions in Syria. Now, what happens if these tensions between these two get out of control? Now, after all, these are still speculations, but we still must realize that we have two ongoing wars next door and that this is serious enough. Now, another thing that I didn't mention is the potential refugee crisis that this might create. But I will save this topic for the future when we know more about the war. This is a very difficult and complex situation, and the best solution would be a ceasefire as soon as possible, which is unrealistic. I neither like Israel nor the Iranian regime, and whatever happens will be devastating. If Israel wins, then there is no one stopping them anymore from becoming a regional power. And if Iran wins, then the tensions will just rise further and another war will be imminent. Plus, I didn't even talk about all the refugees that this might create. If Iran wins, then the Kurds and the Azeris and other minorities will not be welcome in Iran, so they will have to flee. And where will they flee? Probably into Europe. In times like this, we can only pray for the best. I'm Slovak Riper and I'll see you next week.